Commander Sarah Chun pressed her back against the cold metal bulkhead of the alien vessel, her breathing shallow and controlled. The corridor stretched endlessly in both directions, bathed in the sickly purple glow that these creatures seemed to prefer. Her neural implant buzzed with static. The dampening fields aboard this ship were more sophisticated than anything in the intelligence reports. 3 days. That's how long she'd been missing from the human fleet. 3 days since her reconnaissance shuttle had been caught in the Kethmori tractor beam and dragged aboard their flagship. 3 days of failed escape attempts, interrogation sessions that felt more like psychological torture, and the growing realization that humanity's first contact with an advanced alien civilization was going very, very wrong. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the corridor. Multiple sets, moving with purpose. Sarah checked her improvised weapon, a shard of metal sheet pried from her cell's ventilation grate. It wasn't much, but it was all she had. The Kethmori had stripped her of everything else, including her uniform, leaving her in the thin gray coveralls of a prisoner. As the footsteps grew closer, Sarah recognized the distinctive gait of her primary interrogator. Vextera was her name, though Sarah doubted that was pronounceable by human vocal cords. The alien was tall and willowy, with 4 arms that ended in delicate, almost artistic hands. Her skin was a shifting pattern of blues and greens like oil on water, and her large, multifaceted eyes could track movement in all directions simultaneously. But it wasn't Vextera's alien appearance that made Sarah's stomach clench with dread. It was her voice, melodious and hypnotic, capable of speaking perfect English with an accent that somehow reminded Sarah of her grandmother's lullabies. The Kethmori had been monitoring human communications for decades, learning their languages, studying their weaknesses. They knew exactly how to make their words cut deepest. Commander Chun. Vextera's voice drifted around the corner before she appeared. Still wandering the halls, I see. How wonderfully predictable. Sarah remained motionless, gripping her makeshift weapon. The alien rounded the corner with 2 guards flanking her, massive, armored beings that Sarah had dubbed the Bruisers. Their species was clearly different from Vextera's, built for war rather than interrogation. They moved like tanks on legs, their weapons humming with barely contained energy. Vextera stopped just out of arm's reach, her head tilting in that unnaturally fluid way that made Sarah's skin crawl. You know, Commander, I've been thinking about our last conversation, about your species' remarkable capacity for self-deception. Go to hell, Sarah muttered, though she knew the alien wouldn't be offended. The Kethmori found human profanity amusing rather than insulting. Such fire, Vextera laughed, the sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Even now, after seeing the footage we showed you, you still believe your fleet has a chance against us. Still believe that human ingenuity and determination will somehow overcome superior technology and numbers. The footage. Sarah's jaw clenched at the memory. Vextera had shown her recordings of the Kethmori fleet. Hundreds of vessels, each one larger and more advanced than anything in the human navy. Worse, they'd shown her tactical analyses of human military doctrine, weaknesses they'd identified through decades of observation. The aliens knew how humans fought, how they thought, how they would react in any given situation. Your Admiral Morrison is quite predictable, Vextera continued, beginning to pace back and forth. It was a deliberately human gesture, meant to put Sarah at ease while simultaneously mocking her species' behavioral patterns. Even now, he's positioning his ships in what your military calls the Wellington Formation. Textbook defensive positioning from your war colleges. We've been expecting exactly this response. Sarah's blood ran cold. The Wellington Formation was classified information, known only to flag officers and senior tactical staff. If the aliens knew about it, they had intelligence assets throughout the human fleet. The realization hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't just first contact gone wrong. This was a carefully orchestrated conquest, years in the planning. I can see the understanding dawning in your eyes, Vextera observed with satisfaction. Yes, Commander. We know everything about your species. Your hopes, your fears, your tactical doctrines. We've been studying you since before your grandparents were born. One of the bruiser guards shifted impatiently, his weapon powering up with a low whine. Vextera raised one of her 4 hands in a calming gesture. Patience, Corvin. The commander is processing some difficult truths. It takes time for a human mind to accept the reality of its own obsolescence. Sarah forced herself to breathe steadily, to think clearly despite the fear and anger coursing through her veins. There had to be something she could do, some advantage she could exploit. Humans hadn't survived ice ages, world wars, and the hostile environment of space by giving up when the odds looked bad. "Why keep me alive?" she asked, genuinely curious. "If you know so much about us, if we're so predictable, why not just execute me and be done with it?" Vexthara's expression shifted, a subtle change in the positioning of her features that Sarah had learned to recognize as amusement. "Because, my dear Commander, you're going to help us demonstrate something very important to your fleet. You're going to show them that even their best, most determined officers will eventually kneel before superior beings. Like hell I will." "Oh, but you will." Vexthara stepped closer, and Sarah caught a scent like ozone and exotic flowers. "Not through torture. That's so crude and inefficient. No, we'll use something far more devastating to the human psyche. Logic." Before Sarah could ask what that meant, Vexthara nodded to one of the guards. The alien raised a device that looked like a crystalline flower and pointed it at Sarah. Energy washed over her, not painful, but overwhelming in its intensity. Her vision blurred, her knees buckled, and darkness claimed her. When Sarah regained consciousness, she found herself in a vast chamber unlike anything she'd seen on the ship before. The walls were transparent, offering a panoramic view of space. And there, hanging in the void like metal monuments to human ambition, was the Earth Defense Fleet. 57 ships, Sarah counted automatically. Everything from massive dreadnoughts to nimble destroyers, arranged in the Wellington formation exactly as Vexthara had predicted. They looked so small against the backdrop of stars, so fragile compared to the sleek, organic curves of the Kethmori vessels surrounding them. "Magnificent, aren't they?" Vexthara's voice came from somewhere behind her. Sarah tried to turn, but found herself held in place by an energy field. "Your species' greatest technological achievement. Centuries of scientific advancement, countless resources, the dreams and aspirations of billions of people, all represented by those beautiful, doomed vessels." Sarah struggled against the invisible bonds holding her, but they didn't give even slightly. She was positioned at what appeared to be the chamber's focal point, visible to anyone looking in from outside. Through the transparent walls, she could see other chambers, other prisoners. Dozens of them, all human, all in the same predicament she found herself in. "The crew of the research vessel Endeavor," Vexthara explained, following Sarah's gaze. "They were our first catch, 3 months ago. Then, the merchant ship Lucky Strike. The patrol vessel Intrepid. We've been collecting your people for quite some time, Commander. Each one telling us a little bit more about human psychology, human tactics, human weaknesses." A new voice cut through the chamber, deep, authoritative, and speaking in rapid, musical tones that Sarah's neural implant couldn't translate. Vexthara responded in the same language, her tone respectful but confident. When the conversation ended, she turned back to Sarah with something that might have been satisfaction. "Fleet Commander Hexthal is pleased with our progress," she said. "The human fleet has responded exactly as our models predicted. Admiral Morrison has signaled for parley, just as we knew he would. Humans always try to negotiate first, even when facing obviously superior forces." Sarah watched through the transparent walls as a small shuttle detached from the human fleet's flagship. Her heart sank as she recognized the vessel's configuration. It was Admiral Morrison's personal transport. The old man was coming aboard the enemy flagship personally, just as Vexthara had predicted. "Why are you telling me this?" Sarah asked. "What's the point of gloating to a prisoner?" Vexthara moved into Sarah's field of vision, her shifting skin patterns now displaying what Sarah had learned were signs of anticipation. "Because, Commander, you're going to have a front row seat to the beginning of the end. When your admiral arrives, when he sees you and the other prisoners arranged like trophies, when he realizes the true scope of our intelligence network, that's when the human spirit will finally begin to break." The chamber's lighting shifted, becoming brighter and more focused on the prisoners. Sarah realized with growing horror that they were on display, specimens in an elaborate zoo designed to showcase Kethmori superiority. When Admiral Morrison looked through these walls, he would see the best and brightest of humanity reduced to helpless captives. "You're monsters," Sarah whispered. "No, Commander. We're evolutionists. Your species has reached its peak. You've spread to several star systems, developed impressive technology for such a young race, even shown remarkable creativity in your approach to warfare. But Now you've encountered something beyond your capabilities. This is simply natural selection on a galactic scale. Sarah watched the human shuttle approach the Kethmori flagship, her mind racing. There had to be something she could do, some way to warn the Admiral or disrupt whatever psychological warfare the aliens had planned. But the energy field holding her was absolute, and her improvised weapon had been confiscated while she was unconscious. As the shuttle disappeared into one of the flagship's docking bays, Sarah forced herself to remember her training. She was a reconnaissance officer, trained to observe and analyze even in the worst circumstances. The Kethmori might have superior technology and intelligence, but they were still organic beings with organic limitations. They made mistakes, had blind spots, underestimated their enemies. The question was, could she find one of those mistakes before it was too late for humanity? Vexthara was speaking again, but Sarah only half listened. She was studying the chamber, memorizing every detail, looking for any weakness she could exploit. The transparent walls were clearly some kind of advanced material, but they had to have structural points, power sources, control mechanisms. The energy field holding her had to have generators, possibly vulnerable to overload or interference. And then there were the other prisoners. Sarah couldn't communicate with them directly, but she could see their faces, their expressions. Like her, they were military personnel, trained, disciplined, and undoubtedly looking for any opportunity to turn the tables on their captors. "Your admiral will be here shortly," Vexthara announced. "I do hope you'll be properly respectful when he sees you." First impressions are so important in these diplomatic exchanges. Sarah looked out at the human fleet, at the ships that represented everything her species had achieved and aspired to become. Somewhere aboard the flagship, Admiral Morrison was walking into a trap designed to break his will and, through him, the will of humanity itself. But humans had a long history of refusing to break when logic said they should. They'd fought impossible odds before, had won victories that should have been defeats, had found hope in situations that seemed hopeless. Sarah Chun pressed her lips together in determination. The Kethmori thought they understood humanity, thought they'd accounted for every variable in their conquest equation. They were about to learn that the one thing you could never predict about humans was their capacity to surprise you when everything was on the line. She started counting heartbeats, timing the patterns of the guards' movements, cataloging every detail of her prison. When the opportunity came, and she was certain it would come, she would be ready. The war for humanity's survival was about to begin in earnest, and Sarah Chun intended to fire the first shot. Admiral Jonathan Morrison had commanded fleets through 3 different conflicts, from the Martian Independence War to the Asteroid Belt Rebellions. At 72, his hair was silver, his face lined with decades of difficult decisions, and his eyes held the steady gaze of a man who'd seen humanity at both its best and worst. But nothing in his experience had prepared him for walking through the corridors of an alien warship. The Kethmori flagship was a marvel of organic architecture, walls that curved like the inside of a massive shell, lighting that seemed to emanate from living tissue, and a constant, subtle vibration that felt almost like a heartbeat. Morrison's security detail moved with professional alertness, but he could see the tension in their shoulders, the way their hands stayed close to weapons that might prove utterly useless against alien technology. "Remarkable craftsmanship," commented Dr. Elena Vasquez, the fleet's senior xenobiologist. She'd insisted on joining the diplomatic mission despite Morrison's reservations. "The entire ship appears to be grown rather than built. The implications for manufacturing, for resource efficiency, focus, Dr." Morrison interrupted gently. "We're not here as tourists." Their Kethmori guide moved ahead of them with fluid grace, occasionally making sounds that the universal translators rendered as polite observations about human architecture or technology. The creature was from the same species as their interrogator. Morrison had reviewed Commander Chin's debriefing recordings extensively, but this one wore what appeared to be formal diplomatic attire, flowing robes that shifted color in response to movement. "Admiral Morrison," the guide said, stopping before a set of doors that spiraled open like a flower blooming in fast motion. "Fleet Commander Hexthal awaits you in the observation chamber. I should mention that we have prepared a small demonstration of our commitment to peaceful relations." Morrison's instincts, honed by decades of military service, immediately went on high alert. In his experience, when an enemy talked about demonstrations, it usually meant they were about to show you something designed to make you surrender without a fight. The observation chamber took Morrison's breath away despite his determination to remain unmoved. It was a spherical room with transparent walls, offering a 360-degree view of space. The entire human fleet was visible, looking small and vulnerable against the backdrop of the Kethmori Armada. But what really captured Morrison's attention were the dozens of individual chambers arranged around the sphere's perimeter, each one containing a human prisoner. Commander Chan was in the chamber directly ahead, her expression unreadable, but her posture radiating defiance even in captivity. Morrison recognized many of the other faces, crew members from ships that had gone missing over the past few months, people he'd written off as casualties of deep space exploration. "My God," Dr. Vasquez whispered. "How many?" 73 in total, answered a new voice. Fleet Commander Hexthal moved toward them from a chamber center, and Morrison immediately understood why the Kethmori were considered such formidable opponents. The alien was massive, nearly 3 meters tall, with an exoskeleton that looked like living metal and limbs that moved with predatory precision. When it spoke, the voice was deep enough to vibrate through the floor. "Admiral Morrison, welcome to the Voice of Convergence. I trust your journey was comfortable." Morrison forced himself to maintain diplomatic protocol despite every instinct screaming at him to demand the immediate release of the prisoners. "Fleet Commander, I appreciate your willingness to meet. Though I confess, this isn't quite the diplomatic venue I was expecting." Hexthal made a sound that the translator interpreted as laughter. "Ah, human directness. Your species' reputation for bluntness appears to be accurate. Very well, Admiral. Let us dispense with pleasantries and discuss the reality of your situation." The alien gestured toward the human fleet with one of its forearms. 57 vessels, representing the entirety of your species' deep space military capability. Impressive for such a young civilization. Your largest dreadnoughts mass nearly 4 million tons. Your weapons can crack asteroids, and your defensive systems represent centuries of technological advancement. Morrison remained silent, waiting for the point of this recitation. And yet, Hexthal continued, "A single Kethmori interceptor carries more firepower than your entire fleet combined. Our smallest frigates possess defensive capabilities that would render your most powerful weapons irrelevant. This is not boasting, Admiral. This is simple mathematical fact." Dr. Vasquez stepped forward, her scientific curiosity overriding diplomatic caution. "Your technology appears to be biomechanical in nature. The energy signatures we've detected suggest some form of living circuitry, possibly quantum-enhanced organic computers. The applications for Dr. Morrison warned. "No, let her speak," Hexthal said, turning its attention to Vasquez. "I find human intellectual curiosity fascinating. Even facing overwhelming odds, your species continues to seek knowledge." "Yes, Doctor, our technology is indeed biomechanical. We learned long ago that the most efficient computers are biological ones properly enhanced. Our ships are grown in orbital gardens. Their intelligence systems derive from symbiotic organisms that have been evolving for millions of years." Vasquez's eyes widened. "Medial, your species has been spacefaring for millions of years." "Our species has been spacefaring since before your planet developed multicellular life," Hexthal corrected. "We have encountered 4,847 other civilizations during our expansion across this galaxy. Would you like to know what happened to them?" Morrison felt ice forming in his stomach, but he kept his expression neutral. "I assume you're about to tell us." The vast majority chose to accept integration into our collective. They recognized that resistance was futile and submitted to guided evolution. Their cultures, their knowledge, their best individuals, all preserved and enhanced within our civilization. A few dozen chose warfare instead. "And what happened to those?" Morrison asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "They ceased to exist." Hexthal's tone remained conversational, as if discussing the weather. "Not through malice, you understand. Simple natural selection. Species that cannot adapt to new realities become extinct. This is the fundamental law of the universe." Morrison looked at the human prisoners arranged around the chamber. In their faces, he saw determination mixed with fear, professionalism struggling against despair. These were the best humanity had to offer: explorers, scientists, soldiers who dedicated their lives to pushing back the boundaries of the unknown. And Now they were being displayed like insects in amber, proof of humanity's inevitable defeat. But there was something else in their expressions, something that gave Morrison hope. Commander Chin in particular seemed to be studying her surroundings with intense focus, as if memorizing every detail. Her eyes met his for a moment, and he saw her mouth a single word. Ready. Ready for what? Morrison wondered. Then he noticed the subtle hand gestures Chun was making. Military signal code, barely visible, but unmistakable to someone with Morrison's experience. She was communicating with the other prisoners, coordinating something. Your offer of integration, Morrison said, drawing Hextall's attention back to him. What exactly would that entail? Your military forces would stand down immediately. Your political leaders would accept Kethmori guidance in governmental matters. Your educational systems would be restructured to prepare human children for proper integration into galactic civilization. In return, your species would be preserved, enhanced, and granted access to technologies that will transform your capabilities. Enhanced how? Genetic optimization, neural augmentation, life extension. We can offer your species improvements that would take you millions of years to achieve naturally. Your most promising individuals would be selected for advanced enhancement, transformed into something far superior to baseline humanity. Dr. Vasquez couldn't contain herself. The ethical implications alone, you're talking about fundamentally altering our species against our will. Against your will? Hextall turned back to her. Doctor, your species is already altering itself against its will. Pollution, genetic drift, social decay. Your civilization is in decline whether you recognize it or not. We offer guidance and improvement. The alternative is extinction. Morrison watched the byplay between the alien commander and his scientist while keeping one eye on Commander Chin. She had managed to catch the attention of prisoners in several adjacent chambers, her hand signals becoming slightly more obvious. Whatever she was planning, it was spreading through the prisoner population like a virus. May I ask, Morrison said carefully, why you're bothering with this diplomatic charade at all? If your technology is so superior, why not simply attack our fleet and be done with it? Hextall's massive head tilted in what might have been surprise. An excellent question, Admiral. The answer is efficiency. Direct warfare, even against an inferior opponent, requires resources. Ships can be damaged, crew members lost, equipment expended. Far better to achieve submission through demonstration of overwhelming superiority. And if we refuse integration, then you will share the fate of the Veltheri Confederacy, the hive minds of Kepler, 442, and 37 other species that chose warfare over wisdom. Your fleet will be destroyed, your worlds blockaded, your species allowed to decline into extinction through starvation and technological regression. Morrison felt anger rising in his chest, but forced himself to remain calm. Anger wouldn't help the prisoners or save humanity. What he needed was information, and the alien commander seemed willing to provide it as part of its psychological warfare. How long do we have to decide? Your communications are being monitored, Admiral. The moment your fleet begins transmitting our terms back to Earth, you will have 48 of your hours to provide a formal response. Morrison nodded as if considering the offer seriously, but his attention was really on Commander Chun. She had succeeded in establishing communication with most of the visible prisoners, and there was something new in their postures, a subtle shift from despair to determination. Whatever they were planning, it was almost ready. The prisoners, Morrison said, as a gesture of good faith, surely you could release them? They're of no strategic value to you now. On the contrary, Hextall replied, they represent something very important, proof that even your most capable individuals are helpless before Kethmori technology. Your Commander Chun, for example, was considered one of your finest reconnaissance officers. Yet she was captured easily and has remained powerless despite multiple escape attempts. Morrison saw Chin's jaw tighten at that statement. Her hand signals became more urgent, and he realized she was counting down from 10. Whatever the prisoners had planned, it was about to happen. Admiral, Dr. Vasquez said quietly, I'm detecting some unusual energy readings from the detention fields. Hextall's massive head swiveled toward her. Impossible. Our containment technology is... Chin moved. Despite being held in an energy field that should have rendered her completely immobile, she somehow managed to twist her body and grab something from her boot, a small device that Morrison didn't recognize. She pressed it against the energy field surrounding her, and sparks erupted from the contact point. Instantly, alarms began sounding throughout the observation chamber. The lighting shifted to emergency frequencies, and Morrison could hear the rapid conversation of Keth Mori crew members outside the chamber. "What is she doing?" Hexthal demanded, moving toward Chen's containment cell with surprising speed. Chen looked directly at Morrison and smiled. Then, she spoke loud enough for her voice to carry through the chamber's audio systems. "Sir, remember what you taught us at the academy. When facing superior technology, don't try to match it. Find its assumptions." The device in Chen's hand began to glow brighter, and Morrison realized what she was doing. Somehow, she'd managed to create or acquire some kind of feedback generator, a device designed to overload the energy fields by forcing them to contain more power than they were designed for. "Impossible," Hexthal repeated, but there was something new in its voice, uncertainty. Around the chamber's perimeter, other prisoners were producing similar devices from hidden locations. Morrison realized they must have been working on these for weeks, scavenging materials and planning their moment carefully. This wasn't a desperate escape attempt. It was a coordinated technical assault on Keth Mori technology. The first containment field failed with a sound like breaking glass. Commander Chen stumbled forward, free for the first time in days. She immediately began working on the next field, her fingers flying over the small device's controls. "Stop them!" Hexthal roared, moving toward the nearest control panel. But Morrison was already moving too. His security detail, taking their cue from their admiral, drew their weapons and positioned themselves between Hexthal and the control systems. The weapons might be useless against Keth Mori armor, but they could certainly delay the alien commander long enough for the prisoners to continue their work. "Admiral," Hexthal said, its voice containing the first hints of something that might be respect. "This is an impressive display of coordination, but ultimately futile. My security forces are already responding, and your people have nowhere to run." Chen looked up from her work on the third containment field. "Who said anything about running?" The last of the energy fields failed, and 73 human prisoners stood free in their individual chambers. But Morrison noticed they weren't trying to escape. Instead, they were moving to specific positions, as if they'd rehearsed this moment countless times. "Commander Chun," Morrison called out, "what's your status?" "Ready to implement Project Prometheus, sir," she called back, her voice carrying a note of fierce satisfaction. Morrison felt his heart skip a beat. Project Prometheus was a theoretical operation developed by human tactical analysts, a worst-case scenario plan for fighting enemies with vastly superior technology. The key was to use the enemy's own systems against them, turning their technological advantage into a liability. He'd never imagined that his people would have the opportunity to implement it as prisoners aboard an alien flagship. "Authorization confirmed," Morrison said formally. "Execute Prometheus." Throughout the observation chamber, the freed prisoners began working in perfect synchronization, their actions coordinated by months of careful planning and preparation. Morrison didn't know exactly what they intended to do, but he could see the growing alarm in Hexthal's posture as more alarms began sounding throughout the ship. The war for humanity's survival was about to take a very unexpected turn. The first sign that Project Prometheus was more than theoretical came when the lights in the observation chamber began to flicker. Commander Chun, now free from her energy field, was working rapidly at one of the transparent walls, her improvised device sending cascading patterns of electricity through what Morrison had assumed was inert material. "The walls aren't just transparent aluminum or crystalline matrices," Dr. Vasquez breathed, her scientific mind immediately grasping the implications. "They're part of the ship's neural network. The Keth Mori don't just build their ships, they grow them as integrated organisms." Fleet Commander Hexthal was barking orders in its native language, but Morrison noticed something telling in the alien's body language. For the first time since they'd met, Hexthal looked genuinely concerned rather than merely inconvenienced. Chen's device finally burned out from the overload, but not before sending a massive feedback pulse through the wall system. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Throughout the observation chamber, the transparent walls began to shift color, displaying patterns that looked almost like a circulatory system made of light. "Fascinating," one of the other freed prisoners called out. Morrison recognized Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez, the chief engineer from the research vessel Endeavor. "Commander Chun, your hack worked. We're seeing the ship's actual nervous system now." Chen wiped sweat from her forehead and grinned fiercely. Phase 1 complete, sir. We've got access to the biomechanical interface layer. Rodriguez, are you seeing the command pathways? Affirmative. The shift control systems are distributed throughout the entire structure, but there are major nerve clusters at key points. If we can overload them simultaneously, you'll accomplish nothing but your own deaths, Hexthal interrupted, moving closer to Morrison's security team. The alien's massive form radiated menace, but Morrison noticed it was being careful not to make any overtly threatening moves. Despite its superiority complex, Hexthal was still trying to maintain the pretense of diplomatic contact. Admiral, Chen called out urgently. We need to move to the next phase, but I need your authorization. This goes way beyond standard escape protocols. Morrison looked around the chamber at his people, 73 of humanity's best, trapped aboard an enemy vessel in the heart of an overwhelming alien fleet. By every logical measure, they were already dead. But humans had never been particularly good at accepting logical inevitabilities. What exactly are you proposing, Commander? Sir, during our captivity, we've been able to map the entire ship's biomechanical structure. The Kethmori made a critical error. They assumed that because we couldn't understand their technology, we couldn't interfere with it. But they're wrong. We don't need to understand it. We just need to overload it. Shun gestured to the walls around them, where the patterns of light were growing more complex and agitated. This ship is essentially a gigantic biological computer. Its decision-making processes are distributed throughout the entire structure, but that also makes it vulnerable to cascade failures. If we can create enough feedback in enough systems simultaneously, you're talking about destroying the flagship from within, Morrison realized. Not just destroying it, sir. Taking control of it. The ship's biological systems can be convinced to accept human neural patterns if we approach it correctly. We've had months to study their bioelectric signatures to figure out how to mimic them. Hexthal's massive frame stiffened. Impossible. Our biomechanical systems are specifically evolved to reject foreign neural input. No alien species has ever successfully interfaced with Kethmori technology. That's probably because no alien species ever had 73 trained engineers, scientists, and military personnel with 3 months to study the problem, Rodriguez called out cheerfully. Plus, you made the mistake of keeping us in individual cells connected to the ship's nervous system. We've been mapping your neural architecture this entire time. Morrison saw the moment when Hexthal truly understood what was happening. The alien commander's posture shifted from confident superiority to something approaching alarm. For the first time since the humans had arrived, Hexthal was looking at them not as primitives to be managed, but as a genuine threat. Even if you succeeded, Hexthal said slowly, which is impossible, you would accomplish nothing. One ship against the entire Kethmori fleet, you would be destroyed within moments. Chun and Rodriguez exchanged a look that made Morrison's heart race with hope. They had something else planned, something that went beyond just taking control of the flagship. Commander, Morrison said carefully, please tell me you're not planning what I think you're planning. Sir, the voice of convergence isn't just Fleet Commander Hexthal's flagship. It's the command and control center for the entire Kethmori fleet. Every ship out, there is network to this vessel's biomechanical systems. If we can take control of this ship, we can take control of the entire fleet. Morrison finished, the audacity of the plan taking his breath away. That's completely impossible, Hexthal declared, but its voice carried a note of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. Is it? Dr. Vasquez had been studying the patterns on the walls with intense fascination. Admiral, I'm reading massive data flows between this ship and the rest of the fleet. The networking protocols are incredibly sophisticated. Each ship is essentially an extension of this one's consciousness. But that also means that they're all vulnerable to the same feedback techniques we've developed, Chen interrupted. Sir, we can do this, but we need to move fast. The Kethmori are already trying to isolate the compromised systems. Morrison looked through the transparent walls at the human fleet hanging in space beyond. 57 ships carrying the hopes and dreams of humanity, facing impossible odds against an enemy that had conquered nearly 5,000 other civilizations. Every logical analysis said they couldn't win, but humans have been defying logic for millennia. Do it, Morrison ordered. The effect was immediate. Throughout the observation chamber, the freed prisoners moved with practiced precision to different wall sections, producing more improvised devices from hidden locations. Morrison realized they'd been preparing for this moment since their capture, turning their imprisonment into an intelligence-gathering operation. Security protocol activated, Chen announced formally. All personnel, initiate neural interface procedures. What happened next defied Morrison's understanding of technology. The human prisoners pressed their hands against the ship's walls, and the patterns of light began to change, becoming more complex and, somehow, more human. Morrison could see the ship's biomechanical systems struggling to process the foreign input, their organic computers overwhelmed by patterns they'd never encountered. Hexthal moved toward the nearest control panel, its massive limbs moving with desperate urgency. All security teams to the observation chamber. Initiate emergency disconnection protocols. Sever the command links immediately. But it was too late. Throughout the ship, alarms were sounding as human neural patterns propagated through the biomechanical networks. Morrison could feel the change in the ship's vibration, the subtle shift in the lighting, as alien control systems began accepting human commands. Phase 2 complete, Rodriguez reported. We've got partial control of the primary systems. Engines, navigation, and communications are responding to human input. Weapons? Morrison asked. Working on it. The weapons systems have additional security protocols, but we're making progress. Hexthal turned toward Morrison, its massive form radiating fury. Do you understand what you're doing? This act of sabotage will be seen as a declaration of war against the Kethmori Collective. Every ship, every world, every member of your species will be marked for extermination. Morrison met the alien's multifaceted gaze steadily. Commander, we've been at war since the moment you started studying our species without our knowledge. The only difference is that now we're fighting back. Through the transparent walls, Morrison could see the first signs of success. Several Kethmori ships in the surrounding fleet were showing irregular movement patterns, their biomechanical systems responding to corrupted commands propagating through the network. Sir, Chen called out excitedly, we're getting responses from the other ships. The neural cascade is spreading faster than their security protocols can contain it. We might actually pull this off. But Hexthal wasn't finished. The alien commander produced a device from its robes, something that looked like crystalline coral and hummed with barely contained energy. If we cannot maintain control of our own vessels, then we will ensure that you cannot either. The device began to glow brighter, and Morrison realized what it was. A dead man's switch, a device designed to destroy the ship's biomechanical systems rather than allow them to fall into enemy hands. Commander Chun, Morrison shouted, can your people complete the transfer before negative, sir? We need at least another 5 minutes to establish full control. Hexthal's device was now glowing bright enough to hurt the eyes. Around the chamber, other Kethmori personnel were producing similar devices. Morrison realized that the aliens would rather destroy their own fleet than see it fall into human hands. That's when Dr. Vasquez did something that surprised everyone. She walked directly up to Hexthal, ignoring the alien's massive size and obvious hostility, and placed her hand on the creature's arm. The contact seemed to send a shock through both of them, and Hexthal's device flickered and dimmed. Doctor, Morrison called out in alarm. The biomechanical systems aren't just technological, Vasquez said, her voice filled with wonder. They're empathic. They respond to emotional states, to mental patterns. Fleet Commander, your species may be ancient and technologically advanced, but you've forgotten something important. Hexthal tried to pull away from her grip, but seemed unable to do so. The alien's massive form was trembling, and its multifaceted eyes showed something that might have been confusion. Forgotten what? Hexthal managed to ask. That technology, no matter how advanced, is only as good as the beings who wield it. Your ships respond to neural patterns, to emotional states, to the force of will. And right now, 73 humans are pouring every ounce of determination, hope, and sheer bloody-minded stubbornness into your systems. Around the chamber, Morrison could see the truth of Vasquez's words. The human prisoners weren't just hacking the ship systems. They were overwhelming them with pure human willpower. The biomechanical networks, evolved to respond to Kethmori emotional patterns, were being flooded with something they'd never encountered. The uniquely human refusal to accept defeat. It's working, Chen reported, her voice filled with amazement. The ship's systems are accepting our emotional imprints. We're not just controlling the technology, we're convincing it to want to help us. Through the walls, Morrison could see the effects spreading throughout the Kethmori fleet. Ships that had moved with predatory grace were now responding to human commands, their biomechanical systems infected with humanity's indomitable spirit. Hexthal's device finally went dark. The alien commanders were broken by the realization that its entire fleet was slipping away from Kethmori control. For the first time since Morrison had met the creature, Hexthal looked genuinely afraid. "This is impossible," the alien whispered. "No species has ever successfully resisted integration. No species has ever turned our own technology against us." Morrison smiled grimly. "Commander, you said your people have encountered nearly 5,000 civilizations. But I don't think you've ever encountered one quite like humanity." The war was far from over, but for the first time since this confrontation began, Morrison felt something he hadn't dared to hope for: the possibility of victory. "Commander Chun," he called out, "how long until we have complete control?" 2 minutes, sir. Maybe less if the emotional feedback continues to accelerate the process." Morrison nodded and turned back to Hexthal. "Fleet Commander, I believe it's time we renegotiated the terms of our discussion." The transformation of the Kethmori fleet was unlike anything in the recorded history of galactic warfare. Ship after ship fell under human control as the neural cascade spread through the biomechanical networks, but it wasn't a violent conquest. The alien vessels weren't being destroyed or damaged. They were being convinced. Admiral Morrison watched through the observation chamber's transparent walls as the massive Kethmori dreadnought Endless Hunger slowly turned its weapons away from the human fleet and toward its own sister ships. The movement was smooth, almost gentle, as if the ship's biomechanical consciousness had simply changed its mind about which side it wanted to support. "Incredible," Dr. Vasquez murmured, her hand still in contact with Fleet Commander Hexthal's arm. The alien had stopped struggling and was now watching the conversion of its fleet with something approaching fascination. The ships aren't just following new commands. They're actually developing emotional attachments to their new human operators. Commander Chun looked up from her position at one of the wall interfaces, sweat beading on her forehead from the mental strain of maintaining the neural link. "Sir, I'm reading something unusual from the ship we've designated Target 7. It's actually resisting the reconversion attempts by its Kethmori crew." Morrison moved closer to observe the distant vessel Chun was indicating. The ship was noticeably different from the others, smaller, more heavily armored, and moving with erratic patterns that suggested an internal struggle for control. "What makes that one special?" Morrison asked. "Unknown, sir. But whatever the difference is, it's significant. The ship's biomechanical systems seem to have developed a stronger bond with its human interface than we've seen anywhere else." Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez, still coordinating the technical aspects of Project Prometheus from his wall station, called out with excitement. "Admiral, we're getting telemetry from that ship's systems. The vessel has a human prisoner aboard, someone who's been interfacing with its neural networks for much longer than the rest of us." "How much longer?" "At least 6 months, sir. Maybe more. Whoever it is has been slowly building a relationship with the ship's consciousness during that entire time." Morrison felt his pulse quicken. 6 months would put the capture date right around the time of the first alien contacts, when several deep space exploration vessels had gone missing without explanation. "Can you establish communications with that ship?" "Working on it, sir. The biomechanical networks are still stabilizing, but yes, I'm getting a response." The wall screens around the observation chamber flickered, displaying a complex pattern of lights and sounds that gradually resolved into recognizable communication protocols. When the image stabilized, Morrison found himself looking at a familiar face. "Captain Maria Santos," he breathed. Santos had commanded the Deep Space Explorer Magellan, one of the first ships to disappear during humanity's initial expansion into this region of space. She'd been presumed dead for 8 months. "Admiral Morrison," Santos said, her image wavering slightly due to interference. "I can't tell you how good it is to see another human face." "Captain, what's your status?" "Complicated, sir. I've been a guest of our host here for the better part of a year, and I've learned some very interesting things about Kethmori technology. It turns out their biomechanical systems don't just respond to neural patterns. They can actually form emotional bonds with other species under the right circumstances." Behind Morrison, Hexthal made a sound that might have been surprise. "Impossible. Our ships are programmed to accept only Kethmori neural input." Santos's image turned toward the alien commander. "That's what I thought too, Fleet Commander. But you underestimated something important about your own technology. Your ships don't just follow commands. They want to please their crews. And after 8 months of daily interaction with the human consciousness, this ship has decided it likes humans better. Morrison realized what Santos was telling them. You've been conducting your own version of Project Prometheus. More or less, sir. Though I have to admit, your people's coordinated assault is far more sophisticated than my solo effort. How many ships have you converted? Chun checked her readings. 47 out of 63, sir. The remaining ships are implementing isolation protocols to prevent further neural contamination. Sir, Rodriguez interrupted urgently. I'm detecting massive energy buildups throughout the isolated ships. They're preparing to implement some kind of self-destruct sequence rather than risk further conversion. Hexthal's massive form straightened with what might have been pride. The fleet will not allow itself to fall completely into alien hands. Better to die than serve inferior beings. Morrison felt anger flare in his chest. Inferior? Your people have been observing humanity for decades, studying us like laboratory specimens, planning our conquest without ever giving us a chance to prove ourselves. You want to see what humans are really capable of? Watch this. He activated his personal communicator, broadcasting on all frequencies to both the human and converted Kethmori fleets. All ships, all personnel, human and otherwise, this is Admiral Morrison. I'm declaring Operation Sanctuary to be in immediate effect. Through the observation chamber's walls, Morrison watched as the human fleet began moving with sudden purpose. Instead of maintaining defensive positions, the ships spread out in a complex pattern that placed them between the unconverted Kethmori vessels and their intended self-destruct sequences. Admiral, Captain Santos called out from her ship. What exactly is Operation Sanctuary? Something we developed during the Martian Independence War, Captain. The idea is simple. When facing an enemy that would rather die than surrender, you don't give them the choice. The human ships began broadcasting on all frequencies, their communication systems boosted by the converted Kethmori vessel's superior technology. But they weren't transmitting tactical data or military commands. They were transmitting something far more dangerous to the Kethmori mindset: hope. Dr. Vasquez, still maintaining her connection with Hexthal, looked up with wonder. Admiral, the isolated ships are responding to the transmissions. Their biomechanical systems are designed to process emotional content along with tactical data, and they're being overwhelmed by human emotional patterns. Morrison watched as the energy buildups in the isolated Kethmori ships began to fluctuate and diminish. The vessel's biomechanical consciousnesses, exposed to concentrated doses of human determination and optimism, were reconsidering their programmed loyalty to their Kethmori crews. This is unprecedented, Hexthal said, its voice carrying a note of something that might have been awe. In 4,000 years of galactic expansion, no species has ever successfully converted Kethmori vessels through purely emotional appeals. That's because no species has ever been human, Morrison replied. We've spent our entire evolutionary history forming emotional bonds with other species, first with animals on our homeworld, then with artificial intelligences, and now with your biomechanical ships. We don't see technology as tools to be dominated. We see them as partners to be befriended. Commander Chun looked up from her interface station, her face glowing with triumph. Sir, the last of the isolated ships has accepted human neural patterns. We now have operational control of the entire Kethmori fleet. The observation chamber fell silent except for the subtle humming of the ship's biomechanical systems. Morrison realized that the quality of the humming had changed. It now carried harmonics that sounded almost musical, as if the ship itself was expressing contentment. Fleet Commander, Morrison said, turning back to Hexthal. I believe we need to discuss new terms for our relationship. Hexthal's massive frame seemed to have lost some of its imposing presence. The alien commander looked diminished, not by physical defeat, but by the complete overturning of everything it had believed about galactic civilization. You have won a single engagement, Hexthal said finally. The Kethmori collective spans thousands of star systems. Even if you control this fleet, you cannot hope to challenge our entire civilization. Actually, Dr. Vasquez interjected, I think we can. Fleet Commander, your people made a critical error in their approach to galactic expansion. You've spent millions of years conquering and absorbing other species, but you've never learned to truly cooperate with them. You see other civilizations as either threats to be eliminated or resources to be exploited. Morrison nodded, understanding where Vasquez was heading. Humans think differently. We don't just conquer, we convert. We turn enemies into allies, strangers into friends. And now we have 63 Kethmori ships whose biomechanical consciousnesses have decided they prefer human emotional patterns to Kethmori ones. Captain Santos's voice crackled over the communication system. Admiral, I'm receiving data from the ship's memory banks. The biomechanical systems have been maintaining detailed records of every species the Kethmori have encountered. Sir, there are hundreds of conquered civilizations that were forced into integration against their will. Some of them are still actively resisting Kethmori control. Morrison felt his strategic mind beginning to process the implications. A resistance network. Yes, sir. Species that have been waiting for centuries for someone to show them that the Kethmori can be defeated. With our new fleet and the emotional conversion techniques we've developed, we could start a galactic revolution. Hexthal made a sound that the translator rendered as bitter laughter. You speak of revolution as if it were possible. The Kethmori Collective has maintained order in this galaxy for millions of years. No alliance of primitive species could hope to challenge us. Fleet Commander, Morrison said quietly, you still don't understand what you're dealing with. Humans don't just fight wars, we inspire them. Give us a cause worth fighting for, and we'll find ways to win battles that should be impossible. He gestured toward the converted fleet hanging in space around them. Your own ships are proof of that. By every logical measure, what we've accomplished here today should have been impossible. But humans have been doing impossible things since we first learned to use tools. Commander Chen stepped away from her interface station, her work complete. Sir, all ships are reporting full integration with human neural patterns. The biomechanical systems are actually requesting permanent human crew assignments. They want to stay under our command. Morrison turned back to Hexthal. Fleet Commander, I'm prepared to offer you the same choice you offered us. You can accept integration into a new kind of galactic civilization, one based on cooperation rather than conquest, where you can face the consequences of continued resistance. And what would this integration entail? Hexthal asked, though its tone suggested it already suspected the answer. Your knowledge and technology combined with human adaptability and determination. Your people would retain their cultural identity and their worlds, but you'd work with us to contact the species you've conquered and offer them true freedom of choice. No more forced integration. No more cultural absorption. Just honest cooperation between equals. Dr. Vasquez looked up from her continued analysis of the ship's systems. Admiral, I'm detecting something remarkable in the biomechanical networks. The ships aren't just accepting human control, they're evolving. The neural patterns are becoming more complex, more creative. It's as if exposure to human consciousness is causing them to develop their own unique personalities. Morrison smiled. It was exactly what he'd hoped would happen. Humans didn't just use technology, they inspired it to become something greater than the sum of its parts. Fleet Commander Hexthal, Morrison said formally, on behalf of humanity and our new biomechanical allies, I'm offering the Kethmori Collective one chance to join us in building something better than either of our species could achieve alone. What's your answer? The alien commander looked around the observation chamber, at the humans who had turned captivity into victory, at the ship's systems that were now humming with contentment under human influence, at the fleet beyond that had chosen cooperation over conquest. For the first time since Morrison had met the creature, Hexthal looked uncertain. And, in that uncertainty, Morrison saw the seeds of something that might eventually grow into hope. The galaxy was about to change in ways that no one, human or Kethmori, could have imagined. 6 months after the Battle of the Voice of Convergence, Admiral Morrison stood on the observation deck of the newly christened UES Prometheus, watching the most remarkable sight in galactic history unfold before him. The ship had once been a Kethmori heavy cruiser, but now its biomechanical hull bore the insignia of the United Species Alliance, a symbol that would have been incomprehensible just a year ago. In the space around the former Kethmori colony world of Velthara Prime, over 300 vessels hung in formation. Human ships flew alongside converted Kethmori vessels, but they were no longer alone. Slik Veltaran crystal ships reflected starlight like prisms. The organic vessels of the hive minds moved with fluid grace. Ancient Zephyrian warships, their crews freed from Kethmori mental conditioning for the first time in millennia, blazed with renewed purpose. Final count, Admiral, Commander Chen reported from the bridge communication station. The Prometheus's biomechanical consciousness had specifically requested that Chun serve as its primary human liaison, developing what could only be described as a deep friendship with the ship's artificial mind. 312 vessels representing 47 liberated species. The largest fleet of free peoples assembled in this galaxy in over 1 million years. Morrison nodded, though his attention was focused on the massive structure taking shape in Velthara's orbit. The construction project had been Chen's idea, inspired by her growing understanding of biomechanical psychology. If they were going to build a truly cooperative galactic civilization, they needed a symbol that represented unity rather than conquest. How's the station construction progressing? Morrison asked. Ahead of schedule, sir. The biomechanical ships are working with the Veltharan crystal shapers to grow the station's living sections around the crystalline core structures. The hive mind are providing computational support, and the Zephyrians are installing the most advanced defensive systems this galaxy has ever seen. The station was unlike anything that had existed before, part grown, part built, part crystallized into existence through cooperative effort. It would serve as the headquarters for the United Species Alliance, a place where representatives from dozens of worlds could meet as equals rather than conquered subjects reporting to Kethmori overlords. Sir, Lieutenant Rodriguez called from the tactical station. We're receiving a priority transmission from Earth. Admiral Fletcher is requesting immediate conference. Morrison sighed. Earth's reaction to the Liberation War had been complicated. The discovery that humanity had accidentally started a galactic revolution had created political upheavals that were still reverberating through human space. Admiral Fletcher represented the faction that believed humanity should be leading the new alliance rather than participating in it as an equal member. Put him through. Admiral Fletcher's weathered face appeared on the main view screen, his expression radiating disapproval. Behind him, Morrison could see the bridge of the U.S. Sovereign, Earth's newest and most powerful warship. Jonathan, Fletcher said without preamble, I've been ordered by the unified Earth government to officially request your return to human space. Your experiment in galactic diplomacy has gone on long enough. Morrison had been expecting this conversation for weeks. Admiral, with respect, the United Species Alliance isn't an experiment. It's a functioning coalition of free civilizations that's already prevented 3 separate conflicts and established trade relationships that are benefiting everyone involved, including Earth. At the cost of revealing our military capabilities to potential enemies, Fletcher countered. Jonathan, we've given these alien species access to our conversion techniques, our emotional warfare doctrine, our entire strategic playbook. If they decide to turn against us, they won't, Commander Chen interrupted, then caught herself. Sorry, sir. But, Admiral Fletcher, the biomechanical ships are in constant communication with each other across the entire Alliance network. They're serving as emotional arbitrators, preventing conflicts before they can escalate. We've essentially created a galaxy-wide empathy network. Fletcher's expression remained skeptical. Commander, you're talking about trusting our survival to alien technology that we don't fully understand, operated by species we've known for less than a year. Morrison moved closer to the view screen. Robert, I understand your concerns, but what we've built here isn't based on trust. It's based on mutual benefit. Every species in the Alliance is stronger as part of the coalition than they would be alone. That includes humanity. Through the Prometheus's transparent aluminum viewports, Morrison could see the evidence of that strength. Human engineering crews worked alongside Kethmori biotechnicians to enhance the biomechanical systems. Veltharan artists collaborated with human designers to create new forms of functional beauty. Zephyrian military advisors shared tactical knowledge that was revolutionizing human combat doctrine. Admiral, Dr. Vasquez's voice came from the ship's communication system. She was currently aboard the Alliance station, coordinating the biological integration studies that were producing remarkable advances in medical technology. I'm forwarding you the latest research results. Our cross-species medical collaboration has just developed treatments for 17 previously incurable human diseases. The economic value isn't the point, Dr. Fletcher interrupted. The point is that humanity is losing its independence. We're becoming just another member species in an alien alliance instead of maintaining our position as Earth's representatives to the galaxy. Morrison felt a familiar frustration rising. Fletcher represented the old way of thinking, the idea that relationships between species had to be based on hierarchy and dominance. It was the same mindset that had driven the Keth-Mori to their failed conquest strategy. Robert, Morrison said carefully, "What exactly do you think we should be doing differently?" Leading, Fletcher said bluntly, "Humanity started this revolution. We developed the conversion techniques that made it possible. We should be the senior partners in any alliance, not equal members in some kind of galactic democracy." Before Morrison could respond, Fleet Commander Hexthal's voice echoed through the bridge. The former Keth-Mori leader had become an unlikely ally, serving as a liaison between the Alliance and the remaining unconverted Keth-Mori territories. "Admiral Fletcher," Hexthal said, its massive form appearing on a secondary screen, "forgive my interruption, but I believe I can address your concerns from a unique perspective." Fletcher's expression hardened. "I wasn't aware that former enemy commanders were now participating in human military discussions." "The Keth-Mori held that same attitude for millions of years," Hexthal replied calmly. "We believe that our advanced technology and long experience gave us the right to dominate younger species. It was the greatest strategic error in our civilization's history." Morrison watched Fletcher's reaction carefully. The Earth Admiral was clearly uncomfortable with the idea of taking advice from a former enemy, but he was also too professional to ignore potentially valuable intelligence. "Explain," Fletcher said tersely. "Admiral, your species possesses a unique talent for converting potential enemies into willing allies. This is not a weakness to be managed. It's a strategic advantage to be leveraged. When the Keth-Mori attempted to rule through dominance, we created resistance movements throughout the galaxy. When humanity leads through cooperation, you create coalition partners." Hexthal gestured toward the massive construction project visible through the viewport. "The Alliance station being built in this system will coordinate the activities of 47 species across hundreds of star systems. The economic, scientific, and military potential of such cooperation exceeds anything the Keth-Mori Collective ever achieved through conquest." "And if that cooperation breaks down?" Fletcher asked. "If one of these species decides that humanity is too dangerous to remain allied with, then they will find themselves facing the united opposition of 46 other species," Morrison said. "Robert, the beauty of the Alliance system is that betraying one member means betraying them all. The biomechanical network makes deception nearly impossible, and the economic interdependence makes aggression counterproductive." Commander Chun looked up from her station with excitement. "Sir, I'm receiving reports from the frontier systems. 3 more species have requested Alliance membership. The quantum crystal entities from the Vega sector, the Morphic collective from beyond the galactic rim, and, sir, this is remarkable, the machine consciousness from the Proxima Centauri region." Morrison felt his pulse quicken. The machine consciousness was legendary, an artificial intelligence civilization that had been completely independent for over 50,000 years. If they were interested in Alliance membership, it meant the United Species Alliance had achieved something unprecedented in galactic politics. "How many species does that bring the total to?" Morrison asked. 53 confirmed members, sir, with 12 more in preliminary discussions. At this rate, we'll have a majority of the galaxy's civilizations represented within 2 years. Fletcher was quiet for a long moment, clearly processing the implications. When he finally spoke, his tone was grudgingly respectful. "Jonathan, I still think you're taking enormous risks with humanity's future. But I have to admit, the results you're achieving are impressive. Robert, humanity's future has never been safer. We're not just part of an alliance. We're the emotional and strategic center of the largest cooperative civilization in galactic history. Every species that joins makes us stronger, not weaker. And what happens when we encounter a species that can't be converted?" Fletcher asked. "What happens when we face enemies that refuse to cooperate?" Morrison glanced at Fleet Commander Hexthal, who made the gesture that Morrison had learned indicated amusement. "Admiral Fletcher," Hexthal said, "in my experience, species that refuse to consider cooperation tend to find themselves facing the combined military might of 53 allied civilizations. This serves as a remarkably effective deterrent to aggressive behavior." Through the viewports, Morrison could see the first sections of the Alliance station beginning to glow with internal light. The biomechanical components were coming online, their consciousness networks linking with the crystalline computational cores and the hive mind organic computers. Within days, the station would be fully operational, serving as the nerve center for a galactic civilization based on cooperation rather than conquest. Admiral Fletcher, Morrison said formally, I'm submitting my official recommendation that Earth join the United Species Alliance as a full member. Not as the leader, not as the senior partner, but as an equal participant in building something greater than any single species could achieve alone. Fletcher was quiet for several minutes, his eyes moving between the various displays showing Alliance activities. Finally, he nodded slowly. I'll forward your recommendation to the unified Earth government, he said. Jonathan, I hope you know what you're doing. Robert, I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm helping humanity take its place in a galaxy where cooperation beats conquest every time. As Fletcher's transmission ended, Morrison looked around the bridge of the Prometheus. Commander Chun was collaborating with the ship's biomechanical consciousness on optimization algorithms. Lieutenant Rodriguez was coordinating defensive planning with Zephyrian military advisors. Dr. Vasquez's voice drifted from the communication system as she discussed genetic therapy techniques with Veltheran biological specialists. It was exactly what Morrison had hoped humanity would become among the stars. Not conquerors or rulers, but partners and friends. The galaxy was vast enough for everyone if they were willing to work together to make it so. Commander Chun, Morrison said, status report on our next diplomatic mission. The Andromedans have agreed to preliminary discussions, sir. They're interested in establishing trade relationships with the Alliance. It could be humanity's first contact with an extragalactic civilization. Morrison smiled. The universe was full of wonders waiting to be discovered, species waiting to be befriended, and cooperation waiting to be achieved. Humanity had found its true calling among the stars, not as conquerors, but as the species that convinced the galaxy that friendship was stronger than force. The revolution that had begun with a desperate escape attempt by captured prisoners had become something far greater than anyone could have imagined. It had become proof that the best way to secure your own future was to help others secure theirs. In the end, that was the most human thing of all.